with ADG, perhaps not everybody, but the basic scheme here is that, well, I'll just review some of the things that we talked about last time, which was mostly my story. Just saying, well, here are my life experiences and how they have contributed to my perception of the vices and virtues and how we ought to live our lives and stuff like that. And then the idea is to motivate people to say, oh yeah, well, from my perspective, I've had these kinds of experiences and that has guided me in this direction, and so I have a different take on these same issues, these same principles, but I weigh things a little differently. I would put more emphasis here and less emphasis there, things like that. So that is kind of the motivation of it all. So I wanted to sort of fast forward through a few of the slides that I showed last time, just to remind us where we left off, because it seemed like it was kind of getting rolling and there was, interesting discussion happening, and I was sad to have to, cut it off. And so here, Arita very kindly went through the recording and captured some of the threads that were emerging and developing, but we didn't get to fully explore. And so I put those, outlines of that into the charts after their words. And so that the idea is we'll kind of rewind to where we were, and then hopefully pick up those conversations and those ideas of where we left off back in January 28th or whatever, January 24th. So, and also I was thinking that this time we might go around the room because I'm kind of I'm not shy, at least when I'm in something like a classroom, I'm very happy to contribute. More trouble at a cocktail party that I'm not so comfortable with, but anyway. So I'm not shy about inserting myself into the conversation, but I want to make sure that other people who are maybe a little more reticent get their opportunity to add to the conversation as well. So I think what we'll do is kind of go around the room, around the virtual room, and give everybody a chance to speak if they'd like. And of course, if you don't have anything to say, that's fine. You can just pass and we'll go on. And I was thinking some of these topics can get a little animated. And so I was thinking, we can't exactly do what we do with the Courageous Conversations, where we say, all in unison after everyone speaks, each person speaks, we say, listen to what the Spirit is saying to the church. That was the little ritual to keep us centered and keep us focused and not let it turn into an argument, but just to say, we're taking this opportunity to hear what everyone has to say on these sensitive subjects. So I was thinking I might, sort of as by a way of, being a moderator or whatever, might interject something like, probably not that many words, but just say, thanks for speaking from the heart, just to remind us, as we do the handover between people. So, we're just, the hope is that we'll find out what each other thinks and not necessarily try to convince each other. Today, at least. So I was calling this Reviving Neglected Virtues, because I talked before about virtues in general and how the way I rack and stack them. But in particular, I got to thinking, well, which ones are we not paying enough attention to? So this is kind of, so the beginning of this is just, fast forward through stuff I did last time. And then the bottom half here is some of the topics that got started but not finished last time around. And I already kind of said a lot of this. Different people perceive the world differently. Our life experiences, our innate characteristics. Among scientists and engineers, there's kind of a split between the theorists and the experimentalists. Do you start with what's actually happening in the lab and then figure it out, or do you start with abstractions and math and predict what's going to happen when you do the experiment? And I think there's analogous things going on in other domains, where some people in the religious or philosophical domain start off with the more theoretical side of things, and other people, let's say social workers, are starting with, lived experience, and that's the main thing, maybe guided by some of those other theories and theologies and whatever. But so where do we place that emphasis? If we perceive the world differently and we interact with the world differently, then that's going to cause us to pick different problems to work on. Our particular skills will lead us towards attacking different kinds of problems. And if you're one of those technological nerd types like me, maybe you're going to be more inclined to look for some technological silver bullet that can solve the big problem. Other people may think more in terms of what kind of social and behavioral change we need to motivate in folks in the world in order to solve big problems. So we all come at life with different skills and different talents and different ways of viewing the world. And so how does that cause us to prioritize different virtues? This quote right here, this is one that Richard Feynman wrote in his appendix to the report on the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. He said, "Science must take precedence over public relations. Nature cannot be fooled." And I like that. I mean, that really speaks to me. And I think, if you're talking about how to cure a virus, nature cannot be fooled. There's a lot of contexts in which you can't talk yourself out of something. You just got to understand the problem and solve it. But on the other hand, it's naive to think that technology can fix everything. So that in a certain sense, technology acquires its meaning and it becomes a good thing or a bad thing depending on how we apply it. What is the context in which it is applied to solve social problems, and what kind of problems, the World Wide Web was going to bring, we were all going to be, one giant happy family. It hasn't exactly turned out that way. And so how we apply these technologies to solve real human problems is a big thing. So, and in page 13, there's questions that'll elaborate more on this. So I don't want to spend too much time just reviewing the old stuff. Let me get.
Can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
Go back up a page.
Yeah.
Page 2.
Yeah.
When I reread this yesterday.
Page 2. Okay.
Page 2. The hexagon of sins, laziness. I recall as a kid, my mother had a book by Bertrand Russell called In Praise of Idleness.
It's a huge topic. It's a huge topic, and I've got charts to talk about it later. So I'll try to just flip through my stuff quickly, and then there'll be much to say on that subject. That generated a lot of conversation.
Okay.
That particular point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're getting to it. We're getting to it. And I just want to remind people what that was about, if anybody wasn't at the last presentation. As I said, I'm a theorist. I like concise little lists of things that attempt to explain lots of stuff. And so, here's one in the moral domain instead of the math and science domain. The Scout Law. A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. That's a pretty short list, but it wasn't short enough for me. It's like, well, is that really all essential? What are the really essential things? And so I kind of binned them in different categories. It seemed to me that, trustworthy, helpful, thrifty, brave, clean, those were kind of, unqualified virtues. But loyalty and obedience, well, reverence, I think that's kind of more or less obedience to God and or obedience to religious authority. But loyalty and obedience, I kind of saw those as moral training wheels. And that, it's fine when you're a little kid and you don't know how the world works to just do as you're told. Yeah, that's the smart thing to do. But as you grow up, you should be able to figure out the rules for yourself. You shouldn't have to believe it just because some important person said it was true. You should be able to know why it's true for yourself. And that's the nature of science also. You don't have to take anybody's word for it. It's not true because Richard Feynman said it. It's true because that's the way the world is. And smart people can help point us in the right direction. But we don't have to take their word for it. We can always independently verify these things. Now, and also, I kind of trivialized these frivolous virtues: friendly, courteous, kind, cheerful. I'm not a salesman. I know I can't do this stuff. And I mean, as a teenager, I certainly wasn't very cheerful. And I've had teenagers in my house who weren't exactly cheerful all the time. But the thing is, though, I think it's dangerous to think that these are just so trivial. It's like, oh yeah, just glad handing and selling stuff to people, and there is really more substance there than I gave it credit for. And in particular, in the heat of recent public discourse, it looks like all this stuff has just evaporated. So it kind of makes me wonder, is kind of everybody, or way too many people in the political and social media domain, is everybody acting like a sullen teenager? I mean, the Who said, a long, long time ago, I hope I die before I get old, and not a real nice thing to say. But the thing is, I wonder if that whole generation is still doing that in a certain sense. Nobody is willing to really grow up, or not nobody, but too many people are stuck in this rebellious teenager mode. And it's like, you're not a rebellious teenager anymore. You're a grown up and you got to act like it. So that's my take on that. And others will have other takes on it. So then fast forward a few decades, and I got to thinking about, short lists of good and bad things and stuff. And so I came up with this little set of 6 key ingredients of a popular movie or a lousy life. Violence, dishonesty, greed, laziness, addiction, and promiscuity. So that's that hexagon of sins. And I found out last time that calling them sins is in and of itself a charged terminology. So I retitled it this time, Landscape of Unwise Behaviors. But I think there's a whole conversation about what the word sin, and is that the right way to characterize things, and what does that mean as opposed to other ways of labeling these things, and does that have something to do with how we're diagnosing and or curing the problems? So, as I said here, I laid them out not just in a list, but in this geometry here, because I see them as sort of related, sort of geometrically arranged for a meaningful reason. And so, you could say, okay, the stuff on the right-hand side, that's the caricature of this ruthless competitor who's, that's one kind of bad guy in the movies, right? Violence, dishonesty, greed. And then on the other side, the promiscuity, addiction, and laziness, that's like our caricature hippie, right? And so there is a little bit of a right-left divide there. And I think there was some dynamics there with that axis. If we go down a page here, circle them a different way, these top 3 here about misusing our bodies. Those bottom 2, laziness and greed, those have a lot to do with how we think about work and its rewards and our responsibilities in life. To ourselves, to our family, to our wider world. And that turned out to motivate a lot of interesting conversation that then sort of segued into the political. And so there's some points on that on pages 14 and 15. So I think this does seem to provide some food for thought about what we prioritize, and about how we characterize the problems in the world, and how we describe them maybe has something to do with how we think we can fix them, or what the world ought to do to try to make these things better. And as I said, I'm not saying any one behavior fits in only one of these bins. I mean, slavery probably hits 5 of these 6. And so different, but there is a certain relationship. Some of these are more kind of correlated or in tension with each other or things like that. So that's why I laid them out this way. But it's kind of negative. Now, okay, obedience and loyalty didn't even make it onto that list, right? Because still there's that in the back of my mind. These are the training wheel virtues. These aren't the real ultimate cosmic virtues. So disobedience and disloyalty aren't even on that list per se. But I think one of the reasons for that, and this is what we started alluding to before the whole thing got started this morning, was the Nuremberg defense. I was only following orders. And I mean, certainly my in-laws were strongly affected by this. They grew up in Nazi Germany. And so they had a very jaded view of authority, and blind obedience to authority was just a crazy way to try to live your life, from their lived experience. And also, I came of age with, Vietnam, winding down and Watergate and all that kind of stuff. I was born in 1960, so a lot of that stuff was happening when I was early teens, and so the idea of authority as being something you just obey because they're an authority and that's the rules of the game. I didn't really buy that. But on the other hand, I kind of exalted honesty above all else, right? That was honesty, truth, pursuit of truth. That is what it means to be a scientist. That is what it means to be a moral, virtuous person. But it can be kind of a blind spot. And I tossed out the examples from, pop culture of Mr. Spock from Star Trek or Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory, where they could stomp all over people's emotions obliviously because they just didn't understand this stuff, because they were just saying things that were factually accurate and to hell with the consequences. They didn't even understand the emotional consequences, allegedly. And for me, I gave my little confessions of some things that I had gotten wrong in my young life, because I had this pathological aversion to recreational cruelty, being mean just for the hell of it, just for your own entertainment. That really bothered me. I mean, I could understand theft. You take something that doesn't belong to you, but now you have it. Okay, I can see where that's a benefit. But I never understood, and I think I still don't understand, recreational cruelty, just being mean to people for the hell of it. And when people did stuff like that, I sometimes reacted in a way that I thought was appropriate, because they had committed the ultimate sin, and therefore, and also if my response was simply to explain to them and to say things that were factually correct, well, of course, what I was doing couldn't be wrong. If I told the guy that he was fat and he was slowing our boat down on the crew team, well, that was objectively true. But I mean, the reason I did that was because he had been so, pointlessly cruel to this other guy for weeks, and just. So the thing is, I recognize that as a bit of a blind spot for me, that I can just decide if what I say is true, then damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, and that's not necessarily the right way to live one's life. So anyway. But the thing is, loyalty and obedience can be overdone. Honesty can be overdone, I have to admit. I still cringe a little bit when I force myself to say that. But nobody's ever been called brutally kind. You can be brutally honest. Brutally kind? No, kindness is not brutality. Is kindness really as frivolous as I thought it was when I was a kid? Maybe not. But it seems like humility and sincerity, things like that, are just uncool now. But I really feel that, we're looking at things that go on in social media and stuff like that. It's so much nihilism. And nihilism might be a provocative adolescent pose. Oh, I'm so cool. I don't care about death. I don't care about anything. It's like, but it's a crappy way to approach life. It really is not a healthy outlook on the world. And in some sense, I think America needs to stop being a sullen teenager and grow up. My take on things. But of course, others will have different points of view. And so that what I did is I said, okay, kindness was missing here, or unkindness was missing from the vices. So what if we flip all those vices and turn them into their opposites? Peace, honesty, generosity, inspiration, freedom, and fidelity, rather than the negatives, and put kindness right in the middle to bind them all together. Because freedom without kindness can be a problem. Anything taken to a perverse extreme can be a problem. And so one thing that I just wanted to say, to sort of put a bow around this and then move on to the new material, is to just say that I think, my view on all this is some people forsake all other virtues for loyalty, but others forsake all else for truth, maybe like me. But such zealots may ridicule kindness, humility, and sincerity if these get in the way of their polarized goals. what they're going to accomplish. But the wiser person seeks a balance and harmony among all virtues. And that reminds me of something that St. Paul wrote a long, long time ago. This is just excerpts from it, but it's, we said this we read this at my wedding. Set your heart on the greater gifts. Now I will show you a way that surpasses all others. If I speak with human tongues and angelic as well, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong, a clanging cymbal. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not jealous. It does not put on airs. It is not snobbish. Love is never rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not prone to anger. Neither does it brood over injuries. Love does not rejoice in what is wrong, but rejoices in the truth. Love never fails. Our knowledge is imperfect and our prophesying is imperfect. When the perfect comes, the imperfect will pass away. There are in the end three things that last: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. And I think some people would say, oh no, I've heard this a million times, this again. But I think if we let ourselves get jaded about something like that, it's worrisome. I think we need to not say, oh, I've seen it all before. Oh, but that's so naive. That's so trivial. I think sophistication can be dangerous sometimes. Whenever seen it all before, so jaded, can't be bothered with these mundane trivialities anymore. I think there's more there. So that's kind of putting a wrapper on the stuff that came before. So what are some of the things that we wanted to, threads that we wanted to pull at to expand on? Loving kindness, why is it undervalued? So I think Arita might have had something to say about this, or anybody else want to start this off? Or maybe we'll just go around the room, actually. Oh, can I get the room? Oh, how do I do this? Oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay. I guess this will work. Yeah, so I guess based on what we've
Hey, Bill,
yeah.
can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
There's something called a chat storm that we use in our classes to get lots of opinions from people and to reflect them. This might be a good opportunity for that.
Yeah. Okay.
So is this the specific question you want to pose? Why is loving kindness undervalued, or is it
well, there's okay. So just to scroll back to let me go here. These are some of the threads. The bottom half here are the various threads that we were talking about. So maybe the chat storm we could do is, which one do you want to start with? Now the order I put them in was kind of starting with the more religious, ethical kinds of things, but the stuff toward the bottom there became much more liberal versus conservative, got more political. So that's why I kind of sequenced in this way. But I think the thing is, this hexagon of sins, laziness, that got a lot of attention. So I don't know. So why don't we, for the chat storm, just say, which one of these would you like to start with? Do you have something to say on?
So which one of the sub bullets under courageous conversations would people like to delve into?
Where would you like to begin? Yeah.
Okay. So the way the chat storm works, everybody, is okay. Open up your chat window. So in the toolbar at the bottom, it's the one that looks like a little conversation bubble, and that'll open a little window on the side there. It says chat at the top, and you'll see to everyone and a place for you to type your message. And so what you're going to do is you're going to type where you'd like to start in this bottom list, but you're not going to hit return until I say go. So you'll just type it in, but you won't hit return. Well, Sheila jumped the gun a little bit, Sheila, but just type it without hitting your return yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then just kind of which of these bullets do you think would be a good place to start our conversations?
Rick, I'm going to sign out and sign back in again. Something is wrong with my screen. It's not
Okay.
the way it should be. I'll be back.
All right.
Yeah.
So if everybody's typed something into the chat window, everybody's figured out how to use the chat window, who wants to comment, and then type something in. And when I say go, we're going to hit return, and everybody's will flood in. The reason why we use chat storms like this in our college classes is it encourages everybody to participate. You don't see somebody's response and say, well, that's what I would have said. I don't want to talk. So everybody kind of gets a chance. It's a egalitarian sort of thing to do. Okay, everybody had a chance to put their comment in?
No, not yet. All of the above.
Well, yeah, but just which one first is the question. Where should we start? Kindness, Jesus, what is virtue, laziness, so freedom versus responsibility.
Okay,
You don't
I
have to
think
write out
everybody's
the
had a
whole thing.
chance. I think everybody's had a chance. Go ahead and hit return. Now, Bill, you can see what the responses are and you can take it wherever direction you want to go.
Right, okay. Kindness can never be overrated. Loving kindness, why is it undervalued? Laziness, power of language to unite or divide. Kindness, freedom versus.
Everything's on there.
Yeah, so everything's on there. Okay, why don't we just start with the kindness thread? Yeah, so Arita, actually, since you compiled all this, a lot of this stuff, do you want to start that off?
Do we take our chats off?
You can close that window, right?
Yeah, you close the window. You don't need to take your chat off.
Yeah, you can close the window. But Arita, would you like to
Sure. Okay.
kick it off?
I guess because that came up because I had a conversation with someone where she was upset that in school they were teaching the kids that if you have the choice to be right or kind, choose kind. And she really thought that was a terrible idea. Right. So I just thought that was really interesting viewpoint, because I guess when I think about the division in our society right now, we all think that we're right. And so what it comes down to is kind of trying to understand the other person's perspective and doing so with respect and compassion to their past experience, as you were talking about. Just, we don't know where they're coming from. And so for me, kind of like arguing and trying to debate really doesn't work right now in this climate where everybody's very defensive. And so for me, the approach was kind of to go and just trying to be kind and compassionate and looking at people and trying to be understanding, and just showing, like, just trying to live by example, just doing the best that I can to focus on myself and to be living out what I thought was right. But yeah, I guess that's me. But yeah, it's a tricky question though. But I think what they're saying is that kindness is always right, but whether you're right on a topic, your viewpoint is right, is kind of a gray area.
Yeah, I would interject. To me, rightness doesn't strike me as being a virtue. Honesty, okay, yes. If I ask you a straight question, please don't lie to me. So if it's a matter of, clobbering someone over the head with my honest opinion or what I think of something, I agree with you completely, Arita. That's not going to be productive. But rightness as itself, I mean, what does that mean in the context of virtue, to be right? I don't quite understand that. Kindness, I sort of get. One of the definitions I've come across about virtue is that, in effect, it helps move things forward, socially. And the opposite has the opposite effect. It maintains stasis or actually moves things in the wrong direction. And so when we're behaving and we think we're behaving virtuously, if we're antagonizing other people or not helping to smooth things, or it's counterproductive, it's non-productive, and therefore not virtuous, not an appropriate use of virtue.
Exactly. I agree.
It seems to me so often all of these things are dealing with absolutes versus relatives. And it's not, I have found that there's not very many things that are absolutes. The older I get, the more everything becomes relative and contextual. But if you look at that in an absolute sense, if I was protecting someone from being killed by someone else, is that the right thing to do? Or do you want to be kind to the person who's trying to kill the other one? You know what I'm saying? And often you don't have the luxury of a lot of reflective time, depending on the circumstances. So, we often talk about hindsight. Well, in hindsight, I would have, or blah, blah, blah. And in reality, I look at hindsight is that opportunity to reflect when maybe you didn't take that opportunity or have that opportunity when the circumstances were unfolding. And again, I don't find that there are very many absolutes because it's so contextual. And the main thing is to be able to forgive yourself for making a goof up and trying to correct it, and maybe give the same allowance to someone else when they make what you view as an error. You know what I'm saying? So that would be the kindness. So I guess I'm saying, I don't know. Yeah.
Others?
Well, I want to share some experience from my work. I worked for Xerox for about maybe 27 to 30 years. And during my tenure at Xerox, I tend to believe that niceness and kindness sometimes get in the way of accomplishing your task, so to speak. So if you're too kind to take on every responsibility possible, you end up accomplishing nothing. So I don't know if that's called kindness, but if you commit to, oh, nobody wants to do that, oh, I'll do it, but then you take on so much on your plate by being nice or kind of confusing the two issues, then you're defeating the purpose to try to get the work done, basically, and depriving of others signing on to the responsibility. That's it.
I am. What raises the question that gets raised in my mind is, what is kindness? There's a saying, the helpful hand strikes again, which means a person who's trying to be helpful or kind sometimes puts a kind of a wet blanket on, or stultifies another person's desires, wants, behavior. And it's a little bit also like the idea that, I guess what the idea I'm saying is that a strength that a person has can be overdone. So that, let's say, a person who's good at leadership overdoes that leadership and tries harder and becomes authoritarian. Or a person who's very good at figures and numbers and details does it too much and becomes kind of paralyzed by the analysis of it all. A person who tries to be nice or kind can often become overbearing almost, or reduce people's sense of freedom for themselves because they've got this person just being too nice to them. That's the question I've got, I guess.
Yeah, I guess, well, there's also, is it kind if you make yourself a doormat?
Yeah, that's another good, yeah.
That's another angle on this.
You're right.
I think that's the misconception. I think that's why it gets such a bad rap, is being Pollyannish. So then people go the opposite extreme. It's like, well, what's the most celebrated virtues that we have right now is being aggressive, being like, smart and aggressive and productive and like leadership in a very strong sense. But, so finding the balance, I think, is important.
I think the essence of kindness is suspending our own attitudes and so forth to hold in suspense or give the other person the benefit of the doubt. So it's withholding judgment in many respects.
And
And
people,
I would agree with you, accepting everything that someone wants to give you is not being nice or kind. It's, obviously you're allowing yourself to potentially be exploited if you do that knowingly. So I credit Hilda for her insight, because that's true.
Mhm.
And knowing that, presumably, one wouldn't accept just everything that everyone wants you to do. Although I will share, one of my earliest career insights and successes was I was always willing to do the things that other people would not want to do or choose to do. And that served me very well in the early years of my career, because I took on things that other people didn't want to do, and I was successful at it. So it can kind of cut both ways.
I think that's interesting, Frank. And I think of, the fruits of the spirit, right? So kindness is one of the fruits of the spirit. And I think would be defined as something like concern or consideration for others without regard to reward or praise for self.
You're losing
Right.
your voice, Rick. I can't hear you.
Sorry, it must be my mic. Anyway, I think kindness is an essence of looking out for other people and not necessarily not expecting anything back. And it's interesting, there are some early studies by Yale, et cetera, that show that children have an innate kindness. Look at small children, then they're typically helping each other. And it's something, if we get concerned as adults that we can't get what we need, we tend to be unkind and be more focused on ourselves than on others. And I think, Bill, you talk about kind of new generation, that seems to be where we've slid, where people are more concerned about getting what they need or how they might be harmed in some way. And so they're more inwardly focused, which is another trait of teenagers, as you mentioned before as well, right? They're going through so much internal stuff that they get focused on themselves as opposed to focus on how can they help others.
Yeah, I was thinking about this this slide here, choice to be right or be kind. Well, okay, so I think we being right. What exactly do we mean by that? But what if we changed that and made it a harder question? What if you have the choice to be honest or kind? That's the harder one, right? I don't know if people saw The Good Place, but anybody remember the red boots? He couldn't be, his friend loved these ugly red cowboy boots, and he couldn't bring himself to say, oh, they're hideous. I don't, and so he was just torn up. Chidi was torn up with this problem of, am I honest or am I kind? What do I do? How do I, and so how do we thread that needle? Can we be honest and also be kind in that situation? Chidi got it wrong. How could he have done it better?
Well, a lot of medical doctors have to have that kind of a dual trait. They have to be honest about a person's diagnosis, but they can do it in a kind way, or they can do it in a kind of a mean-spirited way, or indifferent way, an impersonal way.
That's a good example.
I
I think oftentimes again, it's a matter of reflective time, looking at your own motivation and the needs of the other and how those kind of balance out. And, in that case, kindness would probably supersede if it's just a motive of your own is selfishness, or showing that you're right, or showing that you know more, or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve by your honesty.
Yeah, so often, as a manager, brutal honesty would not achieve the effect I wanted. In other
No.
words, if an employee is not doing what I want them to do, or they're actually doing something counterproductive, I mean, just throwing that in someone's face is not going to change their behavior. And in fact, you kind of build an animosity there. So you really, brutal honesty would not help me achieve what I wanted with my subordinate, with my employee. I had to find a different way, which usually wound up, it's sort of a kindness oriented approach by, trying to affect that behavior or coming at it from a different direction. Just being brutally honest would not have been productive.
I think of the phrase speaking the truth in love, which means that it's the way we would talk to our children, right? That we want to mentor them and guide them into a better way and helping them avoid pitfalls. So it does involve some critique of their actions, but it's done with a heart full of love that I think comes across, that this is the motive.
Mhm.
But I would say that I think I think there is some, as you explore the tension between the virtues, I think what that almost points to, it's a little bit like laws. We develop a law in response to a problem. Too many people have been getting hit at the corner of Sepulveda and Marine. We better put in a different kind of light, and that becomes the new law. It's a corrective to things gone wrong. And I wonder if when the virtues are in tension, it's kind of signaling to us that each of these virtues in some way was attention to things gone wrong. But we can, but they do remain in tension. But just to speak to the honesty question, I think you can speak the truth in love, but I think the thing that plagues our day is the lack of honesty. People are so concerned about not being rejected and being part of their tribe that they will not speak their truth because they want to be accepted above all else. And I think that keeps the corrections that need to be made from being made.
That sounds more like authenticity. I mean, if it's concerning, it's the honesty about myself or what I believe, then I think that's authenticity, and perhaps honesty too, but more so I'm not really willing to speak my own truth. I did want to interject or just bring a slightly tangential idea into this, and reflecting on all this, I came to the thought, is there virtue without a social context? In other words, is that why we have this notion of virtue? It's because of social interaction and society.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of one of the tests. Well, what is a virtue? I mean, is it something that one can observe in interactions among people and social contexts?
Interesting.
I think it's interesting. So I've been reviewing Joseph Campbell's work recently, and and actually I'm slated for a later EDG on this, where he's looking at different cultures and different religions. And it's interesting. There's a lot of similarities on virtue in other cultures, Frank. So it kind of supports that.
Yeah, we're all human after all, right?
we're all right, and they manifest itself different, and certainly the ritual is different for things, but there are certain virtuous trends. I think you could take Bill's list and shop it in just about any culture, and most cultures would agree on most of the things there. Some of the devil's in the detail in terms of how it might play out, but there's a surprisingly large amount of similarities across different cultures.
There may also be similarities or differences across social groups.
Mm.
Not only cultures, but the kinds of groups that you're raised in and the groups that you belong to. They all will have their own kind of definition of what is the kind of behavior that's virtuous.
So
Yeah,
Rich, just following up on that,
emphasize different
a
things.
Quaker might react differently than other groups, for example.
What?
A Quaker
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
would be inclined to be to emphasize peace and what have you.
Right, a Quaker versus a lifelong military officer. They might have very different ideas of what virtue is.
Yeah.
Or I think of coming of age, which is what they called it in the Unitarian Universalist Church, or confirmation or whatever. If you look at that experience, that milestone of when kids are in their teens or whatever, and approaching adulthood like that. The kinds of conversations that these in the Unitarian Church, they would each read their personal statements about what they believe. Those statements would not have been appreciated in a fundamentalist Christian church. They just wouldn't have, almost none of them would have been acceptable there. But that kind of exploration and wrestling with questions and defining things for yourself was praised in that context. And so what would it be like in our church? It's probably more like the UUs, more like the Unitarian Universalists than like the fundamentalist churches. But the context really matters.
Maybe it would be appropriate to have adult confirmation all over again.
But that brings up the point that Bill's note, this we all have our life experience and our idiosyncrasies that play into it.
Absolutely.
Well, actually, there's a thing I did at the South Bay Unitarian Fellowship years ago, which is called Building Your Own Theology. There's actually a couple of workbooks, and you'd go through in a systematic way and talk about these questions. And at the end of it all, you would write your own personal credo or faith statement or whatever you want to call it. And I found that to be a really positive experience. If other people would be interested in doing something like that in our church, I'd probably still have the workbooks. And I think I really enjoy that.
Who wrote the workbooks? Are they Unitarian domain, or is it open to?
It was written by a Unitarian Universalist minister. Yeah. But I mean, but certainly one can overlay, you can put a more Christian context on top of all of that. It's pretty open-ended.
Some of that might be really helpful as our church starts to look at another visioning process.
Yeah. I'd be happy to share
really
that.
Focus in on what we each individually do believe and how it fits into the contextual context of MBCC.
Right, and I like the fact that there is not the fact that our church says the Lord's Prayer, but not the Creed every Sunday is a huge plus for me coming from the Catholic Church. Because I have lots of problems with the Nicene Creed, but I'm very happy with the Lord's Prayer.
And just kind of carrying on for what Hilda said about idiosyncrasies. There are personality differences. They also have an impact on how we behave or don't behave as a virtuous person, whether we're an outgoing or shy person. Some of the things that we've been born with.
If you think of the virtues as some sort of a muscle building exercise, which I think maybe C.S. Lewis would have done, you exhibit courage so that when it comes down to the time that it really matters, you've got the courage. You exhibit fortitude so that the time when it really matters, you've got the fortitude, this muscle building. But then if you are muscle building, you're always asking, well, muscle building for what end? for what gold, which to me brings us something like back to something like Paul Tillich's ultimate concern. Like, what is the ultimate concern? What is this big goal that everything is being done for the sake of?
And for me, the Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as in heaven. I think that's not God, please do this for us. That's marching orders. That's what can I do to bring about this imagined kingdom of heaven here on earth now.
Yes.
Well, you're also asking for daily bread.
Yeah, food and forgiveness. That's what it takes to create the kingdom. Food and forgiveness.
And fun.
The Lord's Prayer doesn't mention fun, but yeah.
Oh, we should include that.
Food, forgiveness, and fun. Okay.
Well, Matthew's trying to connect. Doesn't appear to have
So-
audio yet.
I've certainly got tons of opportunity to speak, but are there others who haven't maybe had the chance yet?
Do we want to go on to another question?
Let me just add one thing. I'm surprised it hadn't been mentioned, but when you're being honest, in a way that when you the other person you're dealing with, when you believe they're going down the wrong path, and that in your view it might be in their self-interest to go down the path that you suggest. My comment is,
Jim, we're losing you. Jim, can't hear you.
You're breaking up, Jen.
We can rebuild him. We have the technology. Jim, we lost your audio.
Sound system is
yeah.
working.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So, oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I think why don't we one that seemed like a very provocative topic that maybe we should touch on is this hexagon of sins and laziness. Do we want to maybe segue over to this now? Just the word sin turned out to be a much more charged term than I realized. I can see if you were raised in a more traditional background and people were beating you over the head with it, that you might have an aversion to that. And I kind of was through that long enough ago that it's not as much of an obstacle for me now. But yeah, how do we describe these suboptimal behaviors? And this question about laziness, and I think that laziness greed axis is kind of an interesting one. So here are some. I think it was Arita might have interjected the thing about Mr. Rogers here. So Arita, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So. Well, we were studying Mr. Rogers a little bit in one of the Bible studies, so that was kind of interesting, and kind of how he formed, I guess, kind of gave a lot of support for kids and self-acceptance. But in later years, of course, he was mocked, and then he caught flack for telling kids, "I like you the way you are," and they said that it just raised a lot of entitled kids who didn't, feel like they had to work for anything. I think he later explained, to the class, he says, you don't never have to do anything sensational for people to love you. So it was again, the misunderstanding about like kindness being a doormat. That's not what it is. What he was telling people was like, at the core is that, you are lovable. And so these are talking to kids who needed to hear that. And that's just about every child needs to hear that, but not every child does hear that.
Well, and it's not about laziness either.
Yeah.
It's paired on this slide with laziness, but I think liking someone as they currently are does not suggest, well, you can continue, you can not do anything more or not try and improve, or you don't have to go to school, or that's not the message. The message is, I appreciate you as you are. You don't have to change for me to like you.
I think it's meant to be an encouragement rather than deterrent from improving.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And also, Mr. Rogers' target audience was little kids. So I can imagine why people would have objected to, when he said stuff like that on the TV show. I mean, it's like, well, his target audience is little kids.
Well, I think it's helpful to distinguish laziness from sloth, right? And to distinguish laziness from just inaction, right? If I see some dust in the corner of my room and I'm lazy and I don't decide not to go clean it up right away, if it's only impacting me, then it's, you could argue about whether that's a sin. But if it's sloth, if I know that members of my household are, allergic to dust, and by not cleaning it up, I'm showing a lack of care for them, then I think that's worse. Sloth is one of the 7 deadly sins in the Bible, not laziness.
Yeah, for me, sloth is just an old-fashioned word. I mean, I don't hear it used in general discourse, so that's why I used laziness as essentially a synonym. Now, everything's a matter of degree, right? Yeah. I mean, just because you're exhausted and you don't have enough energy to do something today, does that mean you're a lazy person? Well, we all get tired. So, yeah. So I think it's all matters of degree.
There's a wonderful children's book, and I can't right now think of the author, but it's about a little girl who wants to get a pet. And her mother lays down all these restrictions. It can't be too large. It can't be too small. It can't eat too much. It can't make too much noise. And just this whole list of things. And so when they finished evaluating the criteria, the only animal that the little girl could get was a sloth. So they got a sloth, and it lived in a tree and didn't eat very much, didn't do very much, laid around. And all the kids in the neighborhood initially were mocking her and making fun of her. And then they realized this was a really great pet. They didn't have to take it for a walk. They didn't have to give it a bath. And it was a very clever way of saying, don't set too many restrictions and accept people or accept what you have, kind of thing. Anyway, it was a charming children's book, and it was a picture book. So it's for, 3 to 5 or 6 year olds. Anyway.
Yeah, so I think the thing is, there are medicines that are the perfect thing for a particular person at a particular point in time that could be toxic to another person in another situation at another time. And so, I wonder, while I think Mr. Rogers' prescription is fantastic for the lion's share of people, you could imagine somebody, as I put down here in this bullet down here, if you say that to a self-satisfied, entitled, rich, spoiled brat, who manages to leave out the sensational part and just say, I don't have to do anything. I'm rich. I can do whatever I want, and I don't have to contribute anything to my family, my society, my anything. I can just, so you can take, come up with some perverse extreme example where even a very healthy prescription winds up being not the right thing in some other context.
Well, I think they showed people in the audience who were crying when Mr. Rogers said that to the audience, because it kind of got to the core of people's self-acceptance and this kind of what drives you, what makes you so motivated to succeed. And for some people, this ambition, this driving ambition, is driven by fear. The fear that, that at the base of it all, that maybe you are unlovable. And so I think that just by saying that, it kind of gave people permission to be human and to be balanced and to be flawed and to make mistakes and still be lovable. That's all.
there was a retreat experience I went through and participated in organizing subsequently that used, they refer to it as palanca, which I believe is the Spanish word for lever. And basically, people who would go on these retreats, other people who sponsored them would organize these so-called palancas with their family and friends. And what the intent of the palanca was to express to the individual how much they were appreciated and loved, as well as to commit, some sacrificial act or some type of sacrifice, for them and their relationship. And those would have the most profound impact on people, because at a certain point during the retreat experience, they would receive these not knowing that they were coming, and have the opportunity to read them. And they would always have the most profound impact on people. Just that notion that, gosh, I am loved, I am appreciated, and someone else is willing to do something, for me and to benefit me in some way. So even we underestimate that, the power of love.
If you've ever been to a bar mitzvah, also a bat mitzvah,
Yes.
that to me kind of like is what that's like. It's a celebration of this young individual, the whole family, the whole community, the religious leader, the teachers, the parents, and they're all supporting this individual as they go into their life, saying, you are loved, you are worthy, and we see you. So everybody should have one.
Used to be there's only bar mitzvah, and then I think just later on there's bat mitzvah, which is for girls. Sort of a coming of age kind of a celebration.
Right. Yeah.
How many people do they have there? Only 5 people talk.
Is that Rosie?
Yeah, that's her.
Is she?
Hi,
I can
Rosie.
hear you, Rosie.
Well, I better be quiet.
You can do whatever you want to do, Rosie.
That's not a problem, I'll tell you that.
Well, it looks like we've lost Jim. Do we want to take on another topic, or it's 1:45?
Okay.
Maybe we stop here.
Stop here.
Well, we still, we have some more time, so I don't know if people wanted to continue. This was another one. Let me just flip back here for a second. Yeah. Oh, what we haven't yet talked about this. What would Jesus do as a criterion? And then I think we did get into individual freedom versus social responsibility. Well, actually, this is one that can get a little political. So anyway, thoughts on which of these we'd like to touch on as our final little discussion point?
I was curious about the phrasing of the individual freedom one. Somehow I think the real tension is between self-reliance, perhaps as a virtue, versus the community or the social. I'm not sure what are these two virtues that are in tension, or freedom to me does not strike me as a virtue per se. It is something that we value, but
Well, but I think there's to put it in political terms, there's the sort of the libertarian impulse versus the socialist impulse to kind of go to more to the poles. But just in general, how much am I entitled to my own liberty to do whatever it is I want to do personally, versus how much should my responsibilities to the larger society constrain those behaviors? How much do I have to modify my individual impulses for the benefit of the group? And so that's kind of what I was that's kind of what I was getting at there, and that greed versus greed, laziness interpretation there seemed to kind of break down a little bit along kind of political lines also.
Yeah, I wouldn't even necessarily extrapolate this to our, governance concepts or beliefs. It's really just about me versus us, fundamentally.
Yeah, leave the politicians out of it.
Yeah, I mean, one can live one's life completely selfishly, right? And in a self-centered way that
As long as you don't
it only
hurt
matters what
anybody.
I want, not what others want, et cetera, versus, having some more balanced view and say, well, I have priorities, but I appreciate that, I have to get along, and I'm a member of a community, whether I like it or not. There are other people living around me, and so I have some responsibility to others as well.
Yeah, I prefer the idea of the individual versus the community, and the community. And so I think I'm agreeing with Frank.
Mhm.
I think there's another dimension of that, though, because when I talk to some of my friends who don't necessarily give to charities, sometimes they're not aware of a place that they could give where they feel like the money would be well used,
Uh-huh.
right? I mean, I've even heard that in the context with church. Well, what are you going to spend it on, right? Some people just don't have blanket expectations that their money will be well spent, and so therefore, to them to donate to a charity throws it away. And if you look at the sites that rate charities and how much money actually goes to the charity's purpose and how much money goes to administrative, there's clearly a wide variation. So, sometimes people might have a right to be suspicious, right? There are certain charities where 90% goes to the salaries of the people running the charity and 10% goes to anything you actually think you're trying to help.
I don't necessarily think that philanthropy is a totally other giving practice. A lot of it's done for self-interest. And so I guess I don't understand quite how this fits in with what you're saying, Rick. A lot of people give because they get a tax burden or they get their name on a building.
Yeah,
or it makes
I'm just saying it's more complex. It's not, I
Yeah.
don't give because I'm selfish and I only care about myself. I might care about others, but not understand what's an effective way to reach out to them.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the reasons why I'm part of a church is that we can do things like Habitat for Humanity and mission trips and things like that, and TechnoServe and all the other places where somebody helps me channel my donations to places where I think it will do good. If you ask me how will I help the people in Africa, I don't know how to do that. So I'm thankful to have those kind of places. And I think for some of the people, especially people not associated with the church, maybe one of their issues is they might be very interested in social responsibility, but just not understand how to make that happen, not understand the mechanics. That's the only point I was raising.
Yeah.
I think it also raises the issue of the difference between charity and social justice, which is kind of like another touchy subject. But I think one of the areas that this whole thing I thought was relevant was in Texas recently, because Hilda, you were saying as long as nobody's hurt, then you can do your own thing, right? But with this past storm and them being on their own grid, energy grid, this past time, it was a crisis situation. And so, the government does have to come in and help, but now they're receiving a lot of blame for not handling it well. And some of the lawmakers were saying, well, you need to fend for yourself and just rely on your own, take care of yourself. Find your own electricity. It's your job, your responsibility.
Well, Texas is independent. That's why the adjacent states can't help, because they kind of choose to be on their own, self-sufficient.
Yeah.
But that's where stepping into the shoes of someone else always comes into play as well, so that you don't just look at it from what you have at that moment, at that time, but maybe what you traveled and went through, and what your neighbor is going through, and step into their shoes. And if they're really suffering or making ends meet, and someone else just has absolutely nothing. You got to step into other people's shoes, not just look at it from your own perspective, I think.
I think stating people are self-sufficient is really naive. The only people who are really self-sufficient are hermits. We all depend on others and services, whether they're government or whatever. I guess I don't believe there are any self-made people either.
We are social animals. Hey.
Yeah.
Think of the
How many people have built their own car?
Or in the horse and carriage day
How
time.
many people have built their own house?
May I?
How many people have built their own street?
Hello. Just wanted to throw in a quick thing that my dad likes to say. He likes to say that the only person he knows of who was completely self-reliant was Robinson Crusoe, and that was only until Friday.
Oh.
Back to this notion of independence versus interdependence. I think Rich and I agree, one can believe, oh, I'm an independent entity, I can do all things. But we saw in Texas, boy, take away your electricity or your propane gas or natural gas, and suddenly we're in a world of hurt. And I've often had that thought myself, that, should we have a severe earthquake, we will each individually have to be capable of surviving for at least up to a week without external help. So, if I thought about it, it's like, well, gee, if I lose electricity and water, life could become pretty harsh pretty quickly, much less food and, access to anything else.
And that's interesting, Frank. I think we've got a whole dichotomy here too, because there's also personal responsibility versus, group responsibility. So, if somebody's starving or hit by a hurricane, most of us kind of see the social responsibility side of it. But you can have other issues like, should we pay off college loans for students, right? You can get some good debates in terms of whether it's your personal responsibility to put your money away for college and reap the benefits, et cetera, versus does society have some responsibility to educate, folks to some level. And I think that's a huge issue where people see it, what point, there'll be other people on that spectrum who will probably say, hey, you should have had put food and electricity away, you should have bought yourself a generator. And, if you chose not to do that,
Right.
don't see a need to help you.
Yeah, the survivalists might have very little patience for their neighbors who weren't survivalists.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about patience. Bill, how come patience is not in the list of your virtues?
Maybe I'm not a patient person.
Exactly, because I'm so lack of it.
See, I would like to see other people make their own little lists, their own little moral landscapes. I think that'd be kind of a fun little exercise to say, well, what would you put on your list of virtues or your list of
Well,
bad
a number of years ago, I came across this book, and maybe it was previously on a bestseller list, but I used it kind of as a reflective thing during a season of Lent one year, 4 or 5 years ago. Anyway, the title is called "The Year of Living Virtuously: Weekends Off." The author, goes through these little essays, and there are probably, I don't know, there must be at least 30 or 40 of them at least. But anyway, things like sincerity, greed, empathy, wrath, love, gluttony, self-reliance, tranquility, humility, et cetera, et cetera. But they're from the reflections on her experiences in life and how these virtues come to bear, or what they have to do with the situation she's encountering. So it's, the subtitle is "A Meditation on the Search for Meaning in an Ordinary Life." The author's name is Teresa Jordan. For anyone who wants to do a little, it was a good book. It caused me to think about some of these things too in a reflective way.
Bill, Can you hear me? Am I?
Yeah.
Okay. I was struck by the title, Individual Freedom versus Social Responsibility, because yesterday I was walking with a small group of friends on the Greenbelt, and one of these friends mentioned that she had heard a racial slur uttered while walking a few days before, and realized that she should have said something, but one, difficult to know what to say. She said, I was very aware of how far I was from this person before I said something about it. And she said, you know, I'm a 70-something woman and this is a guy, but I should have called him on it. Only I didn't. And I think, you know, I started thinking, we all think that we would have the courage to do this because silence is violence. And if we don't speak up, that person is, I think, becomes more likely to repeat it around other people. But I think it's just a really interesting conundrum. What do you think you would do? What you like to think of yourself as doing? And of course, that becomes like a movie, right? In your mind. I would say, you're horrible. Take it back. Don't, you know, and you get up there with your boxing gloves, but I don't think that would actually happen.
Well, and also, would it be, what is the other person going to do when a total stranger calls him a racist?
Yeah.
Is that going to be a positive experience in either of their lives?
Well,
it's like, well, he deserves a negative experience. He's a horrible human being.
Yeah, I think if I were rehearsing it in my own mind, I might ask the person, "Are you okay?"
Exactly. That's much better. That's much better.
You know, you seem angry or upset. You know, you've used obviously a racial epithet. Are you okay?
Oh, good one.
Because
right.
that
much
invokes,
better.
You know, you're inviting them to volunteer what is going on internally for them, which again, it's more of a non-judgmental approach. Of course, we will have judged the situation and said, this is horrible, he shouldn't have said that. But that's not what you're going to confront the person with.
Interesting.
Right, because anger is always a mask for fear, I think, almost always. And so, but the thing is, if somebody is acting angry, well, then you're gonna defend yourself. But if they're saying, I'm afraid, then you're going to be sympathetic. But the trouble is that makes them feel weak. If they express it as fear, I fear that things I was taught as a child are no longer valued. That the good old days of whatever it was are no, or I feel like I'm my position in the world is declining in some way. If they, you know, if they could express it as a fear rather than as an anger, what they're mad about, then we could probably respond more sympathetically. And so what Frank is doing is just leapfrogging that and saying, you sound angry, you must be afraid of something, you must be hurting, you must be, and that's a brave move, actually.
It is. And you can say, but I don't have the tools in my toolbox to help you. So here's a card from a friend of mine who's a therapist. Yeah.
Hey, I think we probably better shut it off here.
Jim, yeah. We're just
not able to rejoin. Any last closing words, Bill?
Well, I want to thank everybody a lot for participating, and I hope I was a useful instigator in all of this. And I think there are a lot of fruitful topics that we could explore in this mode. So if we're, anytime we're kind of, we're not sure we can find a program for this week, I think there's a wealth of opportunities here for us to just get to know each other better, rather than to hear from exalted authorities. So I really enjoy this. Thanks a lot for everybody.
Would everybody join me in thanking Bill for leading our discussion this morning?
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
And then I'll do a shameless plug. I am up next Sunday, and I'm going to be talking about the Mars Perseverance rover. This is the most recent rover that just landed on Mars.
That would be fun.
Last few weeks, I'm going to give you a little history of the rovers, why this one is different, what the heck we're doing on Mars, why it's important that we spend your tax dollars this way, and similar things like that. Saw some videos and some pictures from Mars and a few other things to share with everybody.
Terrific.
Okay,
Wonderful.
everybody, have a great Sunday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot. See you later.
See you